The gala was supposed to be a simple shift. Keep my head down. Don't make eye contact. Pour the coffee. But the room went deathly silent the second he sat down at my station. He didn't order. He didn't look at the menu. He just turned and looked at me, eyes like cold, polished obsidian, and reached out, his hand resting with quiet authority against my jaw. My wife. The whisper cut through the ballroom like a blade. The most feared man in Seoul was claiming me in front of the city's most dangerous criminals. I froze, my knuckles white around the serving tray. I felt his bodyguard's hand press down on my shoulder, a silent command to stop shaking. I didn't know this man. I had never seen him before in my life. But as he leaned in, I noticed every door in the building had just been locked from the outside. What he didn't know was that he'd been planning this for months. What I didn't know was why. The room felt like the inside of a freezer. My heart hammered against my ribs as the weight of every eye in the ballroom pressed down on me. The guests, politicians, crime lords, men whose names never appeared in newspapers, but whose decisions shaped entire cities, watched in complete silence. I gripped the coffee cup, so hard I thought the porcelain would crack. "Smile," the man murmured. His voice was smooth velvet dragged over jagged glass. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced the corners of my mouth upward. It felt like lifting stone. His hand stayed at my jaw. Warm. Possessive. Completely controlled. Then his bodyguard leaned down behind me. His breath hit my ear, ice cold. "Don't drop that cup. If you ruin this moment, you won't leave this building." The threat was quiet. Simple. Absolute. I looked at the table. A dozen powerful men were watching me, measuring whether I would bolt. I understood in that instant I was no longer just a waitress. I was a prop in a game whose rules I didn't know. "She's been shy lately," the man said, turning to the table with the ease of someone commenting on the weather. His entire tone transformed, suddenly warm, indulgent, a devoted husband. He leaned toward my ear. "Isn't that right, darling?" I couldn't find my voice. I nodded, a small mechanical thing. At the far end of the table sat a man who wasn't smiling. Director Beck. I recognized him from news coverage, a man whose rivals had a habit of disappearing without explanation. He was watching me the way a surgeon watches a patient before deciding where to cut. The man beside me poured wine without looking at the glass. His hand found my shoulder, a silent instruction to stay still. "Tell them how we met," he breathed. My mind was blank. I was a waitress from a one-room apartment. I had no story for a life like this. "The gala in Busan," I heard myself say. The words scraped my throat raw. The table quieted. Beck leaned forward. "Busan?" Beck's voice was silk over gravel. "I was in Busan that night, Mr. Choi. I don't recall seeing your wife." My heart stopped. I glanced at the man beside me, Choi Min-jae. The name had reached me in fragments across the table. His face stayed perfectly still. He didn't flinch. "It was a private dinner," he replied easily. "We don't do audiences." Beck smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. He reached into his jacket and produced a tablet, sliding it across the mahogany with one deliberate finger. "Security logs are wonderful things," Beck said softly. "They record everything. Even a server at the employee entrance who had no scheduled shift that evening. On the screen in bold digital letters was my name." The table went absolutely silent. Min-jae's hand found mine beneath the tablecloth. He pressed something cold and small into my palm. "Don't look down," he said. "Smile." The metal was a ring. Min-jae didn't miss a beat. He snatched the tablet from the table and set it face down on the cloth with the practiced calm of someone who had been outmaneuvered before and survived it every time. "She picks up extra shifts," he said, his voice carrying the bored certainty of a man who has never needed to justify himself. "She works harder than anyone in this room, including your staff, Beck, who apparently can't tell the difference between a security log and a love story." A thin ripple of polite laughter moved through the table. Beck's smile didn't change. Under the tablecloth, Min-jae's thumb pressed once against my knuckles. A signal. Breathe. For the next hour, I performed the role of my life. Min-jae coached me in whispers between conversations, Names, relationships, the texture of a shared history I had never lived. I used every survival skill 6 years of waitressing had built in me. I had learned to read tables, to sense when a man was about to explode, when a woman needed her glass refilled before she asked, when a smile needed to be softer or sharper, depending on the ego seated in front of me. I turned all of it on the most dangerous room I had ever entered. When Beck asked how long we had been together, I answered before Min-jae could. When another guest remarked that I seemed young for someone in Min-jae's world, I laughed and said the world had clearly underestimated both of us. Min-jae went very still beside me when I said it, but Beck was not finished. Near the end of the evening, he caught my eye across the table while Min-jae was speaking to another man. Beck raised his glass, a private, slow gesture meant only for me. He wasn't toasting our happiness. He was telling me he wasn't convinced, that this wasn't over. As we rose to leave, Min-jae's hand moved to the small of my back. The touch was warm through the thin fabric of my uniform, and something about it, the steadiness of it, made my knees want to buckle. We stepped into the corridor. His bodyguard, Seo-jin, fell into step beside us. "Perimeter is holding," Seo-jin said quietly. But Beck's men didn't leave with the other guests. 3 are still inside. Min-jae's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He turned to look at me for the first time since sitting down. Really looked. His eyes moved across my face like he was cataloging damage after a storm. "You improvised," he said. It wasn't a compliment yet. It was an observation. "I serve difficult people for a living," I said. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but the faintest recalibration. Like a door unlocking a single inch. "We need to move," Seo-jin said. Min-jae turned away. His hand dropped from my back. The cold where it had been felt like a warning. Outside, the Seoul night was sharp and wet. I tried to walk toward the staff exit. Seo-jin stepped in front of me without a word, hands clasped, eyes forward. Not aggressive, just immovable. "I need to go home," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Min-jae was 3 steps ahead. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Beck has 2 men on the street and 1 in the parking structure," he said. "They saw your face at the table. If you walk out of here alone tonight, you're not walking home. You're walking into a question they will want answered." I stared at the back of his head. My sister Jiun's face flashed through my mind. Her small frame, her medication timer, the sound of her voice when I was late, and she pretended not to worry. "I have someone who needs me at home," I said. Min-jae finally turned. In the dim light outside the building, he looked different from the composed man at the table. Harder. More tired. "Give Seo-jin the address," he said. "She'll be taken care of tonight." "I don't know you." "You knew enough to put that ring on," he replied. The ring. I had forgotten it was still on my finger. I looked down at the simple platinum band he had pressed into my palm beneath the tablecloth. Plain, unassuming, nothing like the ostentatious displays inside. "Why me?" I asked. There were 100 people in that room. "Why sit at my station?" He held my gaze for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Get in the car, Naya." My name. He said my name, and I had never told it to him. I had taken my name tag off 2 hours before his arrival. The realization moved through me like cold water. He already knew who I was. This wasn't an accident. I wasn't convenient. I had been chosen before tonight, chosen before I even walked into that building. I looked at Seo-jin. I looked at the dark street beyond the gate where, now that I was watching, I could see the outline of a man standing just past the lamplight, not moving, simply watching. I got in the car. The gates of the compound closed behind us with a sound like a sentence ending. The estate materialized from the darkness, vast, stone, lit from within like something that had never needed to ask permission to exist. Min-jae stepped out without looking back. "East wing," he said to Seo-jin. "Full rotation." I stood on the wet gravel, the cold settling into my uniform, staring up at the facade. Seo-jin appeared at my shoulder. "The boss has a rule," he said quietly. "Anyone who comes through those gates gets 1 night to change their mind. After that, the choice is made." He nodded toward the door. "You should sleep," he added. You'll want to be rested for what he tells you tomorrow. He didn't tell me what that was. The room they gave me was beautiful in the way that expensive prisons are beautiful. Silk curtains. A bed that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. A window overlooking a garden that was perfectly maintained and completely enclosed. I didn't sleep. By 4 in the morning I had mapped every corner of the room and read every title on the small bookshelf near the window. When dawn began to gray the curtains, I sat at the edge of the bed and told myself, useful people survive. Become useful. By the second morning I had quietly begun organizing the household library. No one told me to. No one stopped me either. I learned the rhythm of the house by its sounds. Staff arrived at 6. Min-jae's calls began at 7, low, controlled conversations from behind closed doors. Seo-jin swept the perimeter at 10, and again at 3. The basement door was the only one that was always locked, and twice I heard, floating up from below, the faint sound of a child's animated program. I filed that away and said nothing. On the third morning, Seo-jin brought me a folder. He set it on the library table without ceremony. The boss says you should read this, he said, so you understand why you're here. He left before I could ask a question. I opened the folder. There were 12 pages. Personnel records, shift logs, cross-reference catering assignments across 18 months. At the center of it, a photograph. Me. Taken from a distance, slightly grainy. A side street I walked every Tuesday on my way to the early shift. Dated 6 months ago. My hands went cold. I turned the next page. Another photograph. Me again, this time inside a hotel corridor, carrying a tray. The date stamp read 11 months back. Then a third. A hotel ballroom. A different event. A different uniform. And in the background of that image, slightly blurred but unmistakable, a woman in a dove-gray dress, seated alone at a table near the window. She was looking at the camera, not posing, just caught in the moment of turning. Her face was calm, composed, beautiful in the way that people are beautiful when they have decided something. On the bottom of the page, in Min-jae's handwriting, 2 words. She knew. I stared at the photograph for a long time. I didn't know who the woman was. I didn't remember that event. I worked so many events they blurred together like train stations seen from a moving window. But something about her face pulled at a thread in my memory. Something about the way she was sitting. The stillness of her. The basement television went quiet below my feet. Then from downstairs, a small voice called out a word in the particular tone that children use only for one person. Appa. The sound traveled up through the floorboards and settled in my chest like a stone. Min-jae had a child. I looked back down at the woman in the dove-gray dress. I understood then that I wasn't just a replacement wife. I was standing at the beginning of someone else's unfinished story. I broke the rule on the 4th day. Not recklessly. I had spent 2 days watching the rotation, noting when Seo-jin's sweep took him to the east courtyard, noting that the guard stationed near the basement stairs took his coffee break at exactly 2:15. At 2:16, I went downstairs. The basement was not what I expected. It was warm. Soft rugs over the stone floor. A low bookshelf crammed with picture books and building blocks. A small television mounted on the wall, currently showing a cartoon about a bear who ran a bakery. Sitting cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by a village of carefully arranged toy figures, was a boy. 7 years old, perhaps. Dark hair falling over his forehead. His father's jaw, already forming its sharp angles in miniature. He looked up at me without fear. "You're the lady from upstairs," he said. "I am," I said. "I'm Naya." "I'm Woo-jin," he said. Then, with the unself-conscious directness of children, "Are you staying?" I didn't know how to answer that. I sat down on the rug beside him, because it seemed rude to loom. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. He considered this and then handed me a toy figure, a small soldier with a broken arm, mended with what looked like electrical tape. "Appa fixes things," Woo-jin said, "even when they're really broken." We sat together for 20 minutes. He showed me his village. He explained the political structure of his toy figures with the gravity of a small general. I listened the way I had learned to listen to Min-jae, carefully, reading what was underneath the words. Woojin was lonely. Carefully loved, but completely alone down here. Protected so completely, he had become invisible. I knew that feeling. The door at the top of the stairs opened. I didn't hear him come down. I only knew Min-jae was there when Woojin's face changed, lighting up and pulling inward at the same time, the complicated expression of a child who adores someone and is also slightly afraid of the tension they carry. Appa! Min-jae stood at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at his son, then at me, then at his son's hand, which was resting casually on my knee. His face was a controlled blank, but something behind his eyes cracked, a fracture line, thin as a hair, running through the composure. "You were told not to come down here," he said. His voice was quiet. That made it worse. "I know," I said. I stood up and returned Woojin's soldier carefully. "I'm sorry." I walked past Min-jae toward the stairs. As I reached the first step I stopped, not turning around. "He's wonderful," I said softly. "You should let him have windows." The silence behind me was so complete I could hear the cartoon bear offering someone a croissant. I went back upstairs. That evening, someone had moved a small lamp and 2 picture books to the east wing window alcove. I didn't ask who. He came to the library at midnight. I heard him before I saw him, the particular weight of his footsteps, which I had already learned the way you learn weather patterns when you know a storm is coming. He sat in the chair across from me without preamble. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Before Han does." I set down my book. Min-jae looked at the window for a long moment, as if the words were somewhere out in the dark and he had to locate them before he could speak. "The woman in the file," he said. "In the dove-gray dress. Her name was Soo-yeon. She was my wife." The past tense landed between us like a dropped stone. "She died 14 months ago," he continued. "Poisoned at a private hotel event. The investigation was buried. I have spent every month since then pulling the thread back out." He turned to look at me directly. "You were working that event, Naya. You were one of the last people who served her table." I felt the air leave the room. "I don't remember," I started. "You do," he said, not harshly. "You just don't know you do yet." He slid a single photograph across the table. It was the same image from the file, Soo-yeon in the gray dress, but uncropped now. In the full frame, a waitress was visible at the edge of the shot, partially turned away, holding a tray. The waitress was me. "She requested you specifically for her table that evening," Min-jae said. "It's in the catering log. She asked for the girl with the long dark hair who had served her the previous month." I didn't understand why until I found the last thing she wrote. He produced a folded piece of paper. He didn't hand it to me. He simply opened it and placed it on the table so I could read it. It was a single line in a woman's careful handwriting. "If something happens tonight, find the waitress. She'll remember what I told her." The room went completely still. My mouth was dry. I stared at the words and felt a door opening in my memory, slowly, the way a heavy door opens when the weight of years has warped the frame. A hotel ballroom. A woman in gray who tipped generously and asked me if I liked my job. And then as I turned to leave, her voice, quiet and precise as if she had rehearsed it. "If something happens to me tonight, remember my face." I had thought she was a little drunk. I had carried her words home and set them down somewhere and forgotten them in the grind of the next morning's early shift. I had been carrying a dead woman's last request for 14 months without knowing it. I looked up at Min-jae. His face was stripped bare. No composure, no authority, just a man sitting across from the last living connection to someone he had not been able to save. "What did she tell you?" he asked. His voice was barely sound at all. I told him everything I remembered. He listened without moving. I told him what I remembered in fragments, the gray dress, the generous tip, the question about whether I liked my job. The way Soo-yeon had looked at me not as a waitress, but as a person, which was rarer than it should have been. And then her final words, delivered like something rehearsed, like a key being pressed into a stranger's hand at a door she knew she might not come back through. When I finished, Min-jae sat with his hands flat on his knees for a long time. She was going to meet a government investigator that night, he said at last. She had been building a case, quietly, without telling me, against Beck's syndicate. She believed that if I knew, I would try to stop her. She was right. He paused. She was also right that she was in danger. She knew it before she walked in. Then why didn't she leave? I asked. Because the investigator was already inside, Min-jae said. If she didn't show, the meeting died. And the case died with it. She decided the information mattered more than the risk. He stood up and walked to the window. In the dark glass, his reflection was a ghost of the composed man who had sat beside me at the gala. I didn't know any of it until 3 months after she died, he said. By then, Beck had buried the evidence, and the investigator had gone quiet. I had nothing except her personal files and a catering log with a waitress's name in it. He turned to look at me. I didn't bring you to that gala to use you carelessly, he said. It was not an apology. It was a correction, precise and deliberate. I brought you because you are the only living person Soo-yeon trusted with what she knew. I needed to understand why. The anger I had been holding since I first found the photographs shifted slightly in my chest, not dissolving, but changing shape. She always protected the people I would have used as weapons, he said quietly. She trusted you. That meant something to her. I needed to know if it should mean something to me. The silence stretched between us. Han knows you were there that night, Min-jae added. He will use it if he can. I want you to be prepared. What is Han to you? I asked. My lieutenant, he said. The man who managed gala security for the last 4 years. A pause. The man who should have known those waiters were armed. He said it without accusation. Just fact, laid flat on the table between us. Go back to your room, he said. Lock the door. I stood up. At the threshold I stopped. She chose the right waitress, I said. For what it's worth. Behind me, for the first time, I heard him exhale. Beck's formal dinner was held at a private club, so exclusive it had no sign on the door. I wore a navy dress that Seo-jin's team had selected, understated enough to be credible, polished enough to belong. I had spent 2 days memorizing the extended file. I knew the cover stories, every seam. Min-jae and I arrived together. His hand was at the small of my back, the same grounding pressure as the gala, and I had stopped flinching at it 2 days ago. That shift frightened me more than the flinching had. The first hour went cleanly. Beck was a gracious host. He asked me about our courtship with the smile of a man who already knows the answer to his own question. I answered without hesitation. I watched his eyes for the slight narrowing that meant he had found a gap in my story. I found none. Min-jae was flawless. Together we were something close to convincing. Then, over the second course, Beck set down his fork. He reached into his jacket and produced a photograph. He slid it across the white tablecloth the same way he had slid the tablet at the gala. One deliberate finger, unhurried. I looked down. It was me. A hotel corridor. A silver tray. The date stamp, 14 months ago. The night Soo-yeon died. You were there that evening, Beck said. His voice was pure satisfaction. Not as a wife. As the girl who served table 9. The room temperature dropped. I find it interesting, Beck continued, that Min-jae's new wife was present the night his old wife was poisoned. The government investigator who was supposed to meet Soo-yeon that evening found it interesting too. Unfortunately, he found it too interesting, and now he's no longer investigating anything. He looked at Min-jae. You built a trap, Beck said. Clever. Bringing the witness into the open, wrapped in a cover story, hoping I would expose myself trying to silence her. He smiled. The problem is I built a better one. I've had men on this building since you arrived. Your compound's north gate rotation changed 3 days ago. That took a man inside your house to arrange. The word landed like a blade. Inside. Min-jae's hand found mine beneath the table. He pressed something into my palm, cold and small. I didn't look down. You're welcome to finish the meal, Beck said. But I think you both know how this evening ends. Min-jae stood. I stood with him. Beck raised his glass in a mock toast. Outside, in the car, Min-jae pressed the car key into my hand properly and looked at me directly. East exit from the compound, he said. The car will be there. Take it. Get Ji-yeon and go south. What about you? I have a man inside my house to find. Min-jae. Go Naya. His voice was absolute. please. The please was what broke me. I reached the east exit. The car was there. Engine running. A bag in the passenger seat with Jiun's medication, my documents, and enough cash to make the debt disappear. He had prepared this before the dinner. He had known it might end this way, and he had prepared my exit before his own. I sat in the driver's seat for 63 seconds. I know because I counted. Then I thought about Wu Jin in the basement, arranged his toy soldiers in careful rows, and I thought about a woman in a gray dress who had walked into a room she knew was dangerous because the information mattered more than the risk. I thought about the investigator Beck said was no longer investigating anything. I thought about the inside man. I got out of the car. Seo Jin found me at the side gate. He grabbed my arm, furious. The boss said. Han leaked the dinner location, I said. He also changed the north gate rotation. He's been feeding information to Beck for months. He set up the gala shooting. He built the file of lies against me to buy time when it didn't work. Seo Jin went still. How do you know the rotation changed? Because I mapped this house the first night I couldn't sleep, I said. And because 3 days ago I watched Han speak to a man at the north gate who left before the shift change was logged. I had filed it away. I had not known what it meant until Beck said the words "a man inside your house." Seo Jin made 2 calls. Then he moved. What followed was 12 minutes of controlled chaos that I experienced mostly from a kitchen doorway, Wu Jin's hand in mine, his face pressed against my ribs. Han was found in the communications room with an open line to Beck's second-in-command. But more than Han was found. On Han's secure drive, recovered by Seo Jin's team in the process, was an audio file. A call recording, 9 minutes long, dated 2 weeks before Suyun's death. Min-jae listened to it alone. I was in the kitchen with Wu Jin when he came back. I knew from the quality of his silence what the recording had contained, not an enemy's voice. Something closer. Something that explained why Suyun had not told her husband what she was doing. Why she had trusted a stranger instead of the man she loved. Why she had needed the information to survive her husband's world before she could hand it to someone outside it. Min-jae sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't speak for a long time. Wu Jin climbed into the chair beside him and rested his head against his father's arm, the way children offer comfort without naming it. I put the kettle on. I didn't ask what was on the recording. He would tell me when he was ready. Or he wouldn't. Either way, I was not leaving. After a long time, Min-jae looked up at me across the kitchen. It was my father's voice, he said. We married on a Tuesday. No cameras. No syndicate witnesses. No performance. Just a quiet room, 2 signatures, and the particular gravity of a choice made with full knowledge of its cost. Min-jae handed the recording to the government investigator Beck had tried to silence. The man was not gone, only hiding. It dismantled the Beck syndicate entirely and began the unraveling of his father's legacy. It cost him the empire he had spent a decade holding together with both hands. He did it anyway. For Suyun. For Wu Jin. For the version of himself that existed before a gun was pressed into a 22-year-old's hand and called inheritance. Mrs. Park stayed close for 4 more years. We shared morning tea in the garden, a small, ordinary piece carved from the wreckage of an extraordinary night. A framed photograph hung in the hallway near the kitchen. A grainy security still from the gala. A waitress. A man in a black suit. The beginning of everything. I walked past it every day. I never asked him to take it down. He had made the vow out of necessity. He had kept it out of recognition. And then, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, he had meant it out of love. One morning he stopped behind me in the hallway, his hand resting on my shoulder. Still looking at it, he asked. Always, I said. Good, he said quietly. So am I.